U.S., Iran, and Israel. Rising tensions. Welcome to our Today podcast for English learners. I'm glad you could join us today because we're about to explore a major story in today's world. A story that is not just important for politics, but also for our understanding of language, global events, and even our own lives. The subject is the rising conflict between the United States, Iran, and Israel. This is a topic that's being talked about everywhere. On television, on social media, in classrooms, and even at family dinner tables. Why? Because what happens between these countries can affect everyone on Earth, not just the people who live there. Let's start with a bit of history. For decades, Iran and Israel have been enemies. Their disagreement began with politics, religion, and the question of who should have power and influence in the Middle East. Israel is a small country, but it is very powerful, and it has always felt threatened by Iran, which is much bigger and wants to become a major power in the region. The United States, on the other hand, has long been a close ally of Israel. The U.S. gives Israel money, weapons, and political support, and has often said it will help Israel if there is trouble. Over the years, there have been many moments of tension, arguments at the United Nations, economic sanctions, secret cyber attacks, and even battles between groups supported by Iran and Israel in places like Syria and Lebanon. But in the past week, things have gotten much more serious. The United States launched a series of airstrikes against three of Iran's most important nuclear facilities, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These sites are where Iran does research and development that could be used to make nuclear weapons. Why did the United States do this? The U.S. government said it had evidence that Iran was moving closer to having the ability to build nuclear bombs. A step that Israel and the United States have both said they will never allow. The goal of the airstrikes was to stop Iran's progress, send a warning, and force Iran back to the negotiating table. But, as you can imagine, this action made many people in Iran very angry, and it scared people all over the world who fear that this could lead to a much bigger war. For English learners, understanding stories like this is important. You don't just learn new vocabulary and listening skills, you learn how world events connect people everywhere. As we go through today's podcast, we'll explain keywords, important places, and different opinions so you can understand the news and talk about it in English with confidence. Let's now look more closely at what happened in these airstrikes and what made this particular moment so dangerous and dramatic. The U.S. airstrikes, what really happened, Part 2/5. On the evening of June 21, 2025, the world's attention turned sharply to the Middle East as news broke that the United States had launched a powerful military operation against Iran. The U.S. military, following direct orders from the president, targeted three of Iran's most critical nuclear sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These are not just ordinary buildings. They are high-security, deeply protected facilities where Iran has spent years working on nuclear technology. Some experts say these sites could allow Iran to build a nuclear weapon in the future, though Iran's government says their program is for peaceful energy. The attack itself was dramatic and high-tech. Late at night, American B-2 stealth bombers, some of the most advanced aircraft in the world, flew across the region, using radar-evading technology to avoid detection. At almost the same time, U.S. submarines in the Persian Gulf launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. These missiles can travel hundreds of kilometers with great accuracy. The targets were not just above ground. The Fordow site, for example, is built deep into a mountain to survive bombings. So, the U.S. used special bunker-buster bombs designed to penetrate thick layers of earth and concrete. Within hours, satellite images and videos started to appear online. Some showed fires burning near the targeted facilities. The Iranian government confirmed there had been attacks but quickly claimed that their air defenses had shot down some incoming missiles and that damage was limited. The U.S. president, in a live address, declared the operation a total success, claiming the nuclear program had been set back by years or obliterated. People around the world reacted immediately. Supporters of the action said it was a necessary step to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. They argued that past negotiations and sanctions had failed, so only strong military action would get results. Critics, however, warned that the airstrikes would almost certainly make the situation much worse. They feared that Iran would respond with force against U.S. bases, Israel, or even international shipping in the Gulf. Some experts warned that the attack could lead to a regional war involving not just Iran and Israel, but also other countries in the Middle East and even global powers. For the people of Iran, the night was full of fear and uncertainty. Some hid in shelters. Others rushed to buy basic supplies, worried about what would come next. In Israel, many people watched the news with anxiety, knowing their country might be targeted in retaliation. In the US and Europe, debates quickly started. Was this the right move? Is military action better than diplomacy? What does this mean for global security? As we move forward, we'll take a closer look at how Iran and Israel responded, and what the first days after the airstrikes looked like on the ground. Iran and Israel respond, the immediate aftermath, Part 3/5. The hours and days after the U.S. airstrikes were tense and unpredictable. Iran's leaders wasted no time in issuing strong statements. They condemned the U.S. action, calling it an act of aggression and a violation of Iran's sovereignty. Iran's supreme leader appeared on national television vowing that the country would not be intimidated and promising swift and severe retaliation. All across Iran, air raid sirens sounded in major cities and government officials urged citizens to remain calm but prepare for the possibility of further attacks. It didn't take long for Iran to respond. Within 24 hours, Iranian military forces launched a series of missiles and armed drones toward Israel, targeting both military bases and key infrastructure. Some of these projectiles were intercepted by Israel's advanced missile defense system, known as the Iron Dome, while others struck less critical areas, causing damage but limited casualties. Israel immediately went on high alert, deploying more troops and preparing its own military response. The Israeli Prime Minister addressed the nation, saying, "We will defend our people and our land by any means necessary. We will not allow our enemies to threaten the safety of Israel." As missiles crossed the skies, ordinary people in both Iran and Israel found themselves living in fear and uncertainty. In Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, families spent nights in bomb shelters or listening anxiously to news reports. In Tehran and Isfahan, people lined up at markets to buy food and water, unsure if more attacks or shortages might be coming. Meanwhile, both countries used social media and international news outlets to tell their side of the story. Iran called for global condemnation of the U.S. and Israel, arguing that its actions were self-defense. Israel insisted it was merely protecting itself from attack. Each side accused the other of trying to start a wider war in the Middle East. Militant groups allied with Iran, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and groups in Syria and Iraq, also began threatening to join the conflict, raising fears of an even larger and more complicated war. Many experts warned that the region was now at its most dangerous point in years. Diplomats and leaders around the world urged all sides to step back and avoid further violence, but the situation remained tense. Some flights were canceled, oil shipments were delayed, and the world's media kept up a steady stream of breaking news and analysis. In the next part, we'll discuss how the rest of the world responded, what other countries, international organizations, and global markets did as this crisis unfolded. Global Response and Worldwide Impact Part 4/5. As the news of the U.S. airstrikes and the rapid military exchanges between Iran and Israel spread, governments and organizations around the world reacted quickly. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency meeting to discuss the crisis. In a televised statement, the UN Secretary-General appealed to all parties to show restraint, which means to stay calm and avoid any actions that could make the conflict worse. He warned that further escalation could lead to disastrous consequences not only for the Middle East but for international peace and security. Many countries, including members of the European Union, China, Russia, and India, issued their own statements. Some expressed support for America's decision, saying that the risk of a nuclear-armed Iran is a threat to world stability. Others, however, were critical. They argued that military action almost always leads to more violence, and that only diplomatic talks can solve problems in the long term. Several governments sent urgent messages to both Washington and Tehran, urging them to avoid further attacks and instead begin direct negotiations. At the same time, the conflict had an immediate effect on the world's economy. Oil prices surged as traders worried that the fighting could disrupt supplies from the Persian Gulf, which is a major source of oil for many countries. Stock markets around the globe reacted with sudden drops as investors feared that the crisis could grow and spread. Airlines changed flight paths to avoid the conflict zone, and shipping companies warned of delays and higher costs. Ordinary people also felt the impact. In Europe and Asia, news reports led to long lines at gas stations, as people rushed to fill up before prices rose higher. Refugee agencies prepared for a possible wave of people fleeing the region if the conflict grew. International aid groups began planning emergency shipments of food and medicine just in case the fighting made it hard for people in Iran, Israel, or neighboring countries to get supplies. In addition to economic worries, there was a wave of public protest and concern. Peace groups in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East organized demonstrations calling for an immediate ceasefire and return to diplomatic efforts. Religious leaders of many faiths released statements urging forgiveness, dialogue, and respect for human life. Across social media, millions of people shared their fears, hopes, and calls for peace. As the crisis continued, world leaders made repeated attempts to open communication channels and reduce tensions. But so far, finding a solution remained difficult. In the next and final part, we'll talk about what might happen in the future, why this conflict matters for everyone, and end with a call for peace and understanding. Looking ahead. What's next and a call for peace part May 5th. As the world watches this crisis unfold, everyone is asking the same difficult questions. What will happen next? Will the conflict grow into a wider war? Or is there still hope for a peaceful solution? Many experts say that, although the situation is extremely tense, there are still opportunities for diplomacy. International organizations like the United Nations and the European Union continue to urge the United States, Iran, and Israel to return to the negotiating table. Their goal is to find a solution that respects the security needs of all countries and avoids further bloodshed. However, the path to peace is not easy. Mistrust between the sides runs deep, and both Iran and Israel feel threatened by each other's actions. The United States faces both internal and external pressure. Some want to show strength, while others demand caution and diplomacy. Meanwhile, the people of the Middle East and the world hope for calm. Everyday families in Iran, Israel, and nearby countries simply want to live in safety, send their children to school, and build better lives. When leaders choose dialogue over violence, they give hope not only to their own citizens, but to people everywhere who believe in a more peaceful world. For English learners, understanding stories like this helps you practice important vocabulary and develop your ability to talk about global events. Keywords from this episode include diplomacy, working with others to solve problems peacefully, negotiation, discussions aimed at reaching an agreement, ceasefire, an agreement to stop fighting, sanctions, economic penalties used to pressure a country, escalation, when a conflict becomes more serious or intense, sovereignty, a country's right to govern itself, refugee, a person who must leave their home because of war or disaster, retaliation, taking action in response to an attack, alliance, an agreement to work together, restraint, self-control, especially in difficult situations. Final thoughts and a call for peace. No matter where we live or what language we speak, we are all affected by conflict and violence. As learners, as listeners, and as people, we can choose to support understanding and compassion, even when the world feels divided. Let's hope that all sides find the wisdom and courage to choose peace, to listen to each other, and to work for a safer future. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth episode. Keep practicing your English, stay curious about the world, and remember, the more we understand each other, the better chance we have at building peace. See you next time.